Hello and welcome to Talks at Google. My name is Rob Leworthy. Talks at Google is our home for influential thinkers, creators, makers and doers to share their work with us and how they shape and influence our world. I am absolutely delighted to be today to be joined by a woman who defines the word multi-hyphenated. Pippa Evans is an actor, comedian, writer and the author of Improv Your Life, available in all good bookshops now. Pippa is a core member of Olivier Award-winning West End sensation Showstopper, the improvised musical, as well as a mainstay on BBC Radio 4. Pippa developed and leads a course entitled Improv Your Life, in which she demonstrates how improv can be applied to everyday living, and that course has been turned into the book that we're going to talk about today. Pippa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Rob.
Welcome virtually to Google from South East London.
Thank you. I wanted to hold up my book because it looks a bit different to yours, which looks like it's been framed, like you loved it so much.
I've got a proof copy that your editor sent me, so I feel quite happy. Although it doesn't have any page numbers in, which has been a slight problem in referencing. Oh. I will go and buy the proper one.
Yeah, you will.
To add to my collection. So, thank you for joining us. For those not familiar with improv comedy, what is it?
So yeah, improv comedy, which is how I started doing improvisation, is literally comedy sketches or songs or skits that are made up on the spot, so in the moment. So and you'll be like a little group, a troupe, and you'll ask the audience for like a word, lemon, and then you'll do a little scene and you'll find the funny with each other. So it really is created in the moment. And what's amazing about it is that you generally, even when you've been doing it for ages, and I've been doing it professionally for 15 years, there's still a bit of you that thinks, what we're doing, we're never going to find it. And then somehow, magically, you divin this hilarious punchline or this hilarious moment. So it's making something up on the spot. Making comedy up on the spot is probably the best way to describe improv comedy.
Yeah, I've seen you, and it's an absolutely incredible skill, and you can see just the years of work that go into making it look so natural and on the spur. So the course you teach is about how to apply these principles to everyday life. And I'm ready, Pippa, to open up my life to improv, to bring improv into my heart. Where do I start?
Well, Rob, the first thing I'd say is it's really important to not think of it as improv comedy principles, but as improv principles. And I just make that distinction because a lot of people have maybe been forced to do an improv class during work.
I have.
Yeah, horrible, awkward team building thing. And the fear is often, and I have to hold my hand up and be guilty. I am the person that runs those. But the fear often comes from, I'm not funny. I can't be funny in the moment. But the point isn't actually to be funny. That's a side dish that comes up. Improvisation is a bolt-on skill. So if we can learn the principles of improvisation, we can apply them to anything. So for example, you could say, and this might terrify you, that surgeons are improvising because what they're doing is taking their skill. They know their stuff. They've been to medical school, but then when they're at the table, they have to go, okay, what do I need to do in this moment? So they are, in a sense, improvising. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about improv. And so the first principle that you have to get with is the old yes and, which again, people who are watching will be like, oh yeah, I remember yes and, whoa, yes and. But actually it's such a wonderful phrase, and it's shorthand for really accept and build. So we need to accept what's happening. So if we go back to that surgeon example, they have to accept what the problem is, what the illness is, whatever it is they're cutting this person up for, and then they have to build on that offer. Like, okay, now I need I don't know any surgeon tools, some scissors.
Scalpels.
I need a scalpel. It's been a while. I've been locked in my house for a year. Yeah. So they go to yes and it. Oh gosh, there's bleeding. We're going to have to accept that there's bleeding and do something about that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the same, you could even say, you could apply it to conversations, right? Right now we're having a yes and conversation. This is a improvised moment because I don't really know what you're going to ask me. I have a sense of it. That I know about improvisation, so I'm going to trust that. I'm going to trust my skill, and I'm going to follow my gut. But I'm going to have to yes and you, because if you say, what was your last question? Your last question was, what? I'm ready to go. What should I learn about improvisation? If I was to say, well, no, Rob, actually, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about my plans for the summer. You'd be like, okay, that's not really what we're, and we get into awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd probably try and swerve it back.
Yeah, you probably
to the
would.
book, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's not in my interest not to yes and with you, is it?
That's
Really
true.
And what people tend to do instead, Rob, is go for yes, but. And yes, but particularly, and I know you're an international company, but particularly British people or people that have lived in Britain, and we have infected them with our love of vague cynicism, is we love to say yes, but actually it comes from a kind place. We don't really want to say no, but yes, but translates as yes, but I don't really like your idea.
Okay.
Yes, so looking for where we can accept and build, and where we can check in with, are we stopping ideas before they can develop? We just have to accept what the idea we're discussing is. So if someone says, let's build a new platform for Google, trying to speak your language here, let's build a new platform for Google. You don't particularly think that's a great idea. It doesn't mean you have to go, yes, okay, let's build a platform, and then you're kind of sadly yes-anding in the corner, the new platform for Google. What you need to accept is that's what this person has brought you. So it's more of a, yeah, okay, well, let's look at that. What does this look like? How are you envisaging it? So before we say, no, that's not going to work, we've allowed it to breathe, and that will also help that person feel listened to and heard. So that we're actually collaborating. Sometimes when we're time poor, this is the stuff that gets lost, because we go straight into analytical mode rather than going into our creative, making sure people feel respected, and that their ideas, even if that idea isn't what you need right now, it doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It's just at the end of the book I talk about shelving. Shelving is such a great thing, where you can say, do you know what, that idea is so, great, I think it's got potential, but we don't have time for it right now, so I'm going to shelve it, and we'll come back to it in 3 months when we're allowed to sit in a park.
Great. So we've accepted ideas and explored the space where we could discover new ideas, rather than blocking instantly and going with our gut instinct. Okay. All right. The other great improv principle: who, what, where. About who, what, where. That's a founding principle that I recall.
Yeah. So who, what, where, in particularly, I was introduced to this when I did work with David Shaw, who'd studied with IO, Improv Olympic, I believe, and he's now based back in Vancouver, I think. But I don't know why I've decided to let you all know about David Shaw, but just so you know,
I've done David Shaw classes.
There you go. Talk about David Shaw. And also, I do think it's really important with improvisation, because it's so ethereal. It's actually really important that we mention our teachers' names and things, because we have to kind of honor the fact that they've taught us before. But yeah, so he introduced me to who, what, where, and by this time I'd already been improvising for like 10 years, so I was sort of like, oh, a new thing. How exciting. And what it does is it sort of pegs in the scene. So who are we, where are we, and what are we doing? So, we are Pippa and Rob. We are doing an interview online for Google, and we are in our respective homes, but we're also on StreamYard or YouTube or whatever it is. So we're placing exactly where we are. And so often when an improv scene doesn't work, it's those things that are missing. One of those things, like people will be in a scene, and if I'm teaching, I'll say, well, something feels a bit weird about this scene, doesn't it? And let's check in. Do we know who we are? And they'll be like, oh yeah, we're sort of friends. We're vaguely in a bar. We might be talking about doing something. So it's all vague. So if we haven't actually planted those ideas strongly, then we're actually going to really flounder. And so again, in the book, I just talk about how often we don't actually know our own who, what, where. In the moment, I also talk about how it really does sound like a euphemism. Like who, what, where, who am I? Like you go into an interview maybe, and you haven't really thought about who you need to be that day. So again, it's not just I'm Pippa. Who is Pippa? That's just a name. In this moment, I'm Pippa who's doing an interview. I'm a candidate. I'm Pippa the great actor. I'm Pippa the teacher. So what role are we playing when we go into these spaces? When we're in a meeting, even, we could ask that question, who are we? We could even say, as a team, who is this team today? Okay, normally I do accounts, but today we're doing blue sky thinking or coming up with a new idea. So let's place who we are in this space. What we're hoping to create in this space.
It reminded me of the hard place to start, but as soon as you write one word at the top, it sort of, by limiting yourself, you actually open yourself up to be able to think of more ideas. That having nothing is actually almost too intimidating, but giving yourself a catalyst to start from allows creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's also referred to as the circle of ideas. So the circle of ideas, when we start a scene, or anything, we start a project, whatever. If if it's like, it can be anything, people freeze in that time because they don't know what does that mean? Whereas if you say, we need to design a new way to see, and you put new kind of alternative to glasses, our circle is much smaller. We know what we're looking for. So, okay, what are we doing? We're designing some new glasses. So as soon as the parameter gets smaller, so if you visualize a circle, you could say, okay, we know who we are, we know where we are, we know what we're doing, and the circle's here. And then actually we can work really neatly and succinctly in that space. And exactly as you say, it's like, yeah, if we get rid of, we feel like at times we can feel like we're reducing ourselves, we're not giving ourselves space, but actually the minute we have boundaries that we can respect, we're much freer.
That's great. All right, so we've got accepting ideas, yes, and who, what, where. A part of the book that really spoke to me was follow your obvious. Perhaps we can talk about follow your obvious.
Yeah, I really love this. I think of it as how Paul McCartney always goes on about how he wrote yesterday. I feel like that's my yesterday.
It's great.
So I was just thinking,
in my book, it's got its own little post-it note in. That's how much I loved it.
It's so special. Well, yeah, and it was literally, and it came from me. Like I used to be a very anxious person, and I would constantly think I was making a bad choice, that I wasn't doing the right thing, that I was, and I would always be checking in with other people, like, but Rob, what do you think? What do you think? Should I do this interview on Google? I don't know. Is it a good idea? Should I do this? Asking my husband constantly, family, friends, and it was almost like I wouldn't make a decision, or I wouldn't follow an idea through unless someone else had already validated it for me. So actually, in improvisation, you don't have that choice, because you're in the moment in this scene. You have to follow the obvious thing for you to do next, because that's the only thing the audience can make sense of. So a great way to make sense, to do an example of that would be, if I say the word orange, what's the next word you think of, Rob?
Apple.
Great. I think of Trump. So those are two completely different answers, but they're actually really obvious when you think about them.
Yeah. And
they are both correct. So the only thing we can do is follow our obvious, because actually, if I'd said, oh, I'll just do what Rob said, I wouldn't be doing something that felt authentic to me. So we need to follow our obvious and trust our skill and our gut, like trust. So the only time that's not going to work is if you're doing something that you have literally no idea about at all. So it has to be paired with being willing to fail, actually. Yeah. So follow your obvious, but you have to be willing to fail.
Which does lead onto the next bullet point in my notes, which is being willing to fail and creating a space with your team, with your colleagues, with your family, where failure is allowed. And I know, like, personally, I'm someone who hates failing. And so then that is sometimes a blocker to actually starting things, particularly kind of personal creative projects. And so how does improv work as failure training?
Well, because you do a show in front of anything from 2 to 1,000 people, and you will do a scene which sucks so hard, and everybody is just sitting in such awkward silence. You have to stand there and be like, that was my dream. Those were my ideas. But the thing is, you don't have a choice to not come back on stage, really. So I mean, obviously you could stand at the stage and not do anything, but you know what? You get off, you get back up. You fall on your face, you get back up. You feel what it is to make little mistakes. So like, you don't quite hear someone's offer properly. So that's a different way of fail. I failed to hear properly. Okay, so I'm going to listen better. We literally just failed because for some reason there was no magic today. I mean, sometimes it's ethereal like that, but it really is practice in falling on your face and getting back up, and then realizing it wasn't so bad, and that actually you couldn't get better if you didn't have that opportunity to fall on your face. And it's amazing what people consider to be failures, actually. My dad just read the book, which is probably the most terrifying person to wait for a review from. And he sent me an email. Just said, don't tell me about failure. And he was talking about when he was a kid, he played the piano, and he was so terrified that he would, and he's 75, so he was back in the days when you didn't encourage children nicely. So he had to play. He just remember shaking trying to play the piano correctly. And then when he heard a jazz improviser talking, to someone. He was being interviewed, and they said, "But how does it work? How does failure work?" He said, "Well, actually, you might end on an A chord and you realize everyone else has finished on a D minor chord. So you need to find a way to make the A chord sound like a D minor. So that you kind of notice the failure and then be agile enough to change it." And my dad said he just heard that and went, "Oh, I wish I'd been allowed to have that attitude. How could I make it sound like I wasn't failing?" So I think checking in also, like, what are you calling a failure is really important, because sometimes we're calling little tiny mistakes, errors, failures, and it's a big word to use, actually.
Do you think there's anything in our schooling system where we define success as the A grade, and we don't allow kids to have that space to fail and experiment with themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my school, B meant bad, so B means bad, girls. So that's not. It's not a good way to learn, because exactly as you say, then you get the accolades. Also, it means you learn how to pass exams rather than learn how to live, and learn how to be creative and how to be excited about learning, because everything comes with this weight of, I must get a grade. So I went to a private school. So there was a pressure. My parents were paying money for this education, whereas two of my brothers, my parents were like, "Forget it."
They picked a favorite.
They'll be fine. They weren't planning to have four of us, so they sent those two to normal school. And those guys, they actually, to be honest, much more balanced about this stuff, because their school was less pressured in that sense, or maybe even that message. I remember my school constantly saying, "Your parents are paying a lot of money. Make sure you work hard." Wow. Okay. And I say all that with love. I really had a great school, a great time. It was just, I just remember this huge pressure. And wouldn't it be great? Like, sometimes I didn't learn cooking. I didn't learn anything where it's like sort of, it's a life skill, but it's playful, I would love to see more of that in school, particularly in high school, because, and I said at the beginning of the book, there's this moment where kids learn cynicism, and it's a really sad time, because actually most kids can feel their sense of play disappearing, and would probably, if they had permission, would really like to hold on to it.
So if you had, and I know there'll be parents of Googlers typically have kind of youngish kids, what tips might you give parents out there who have kids who perhaps are on that cusp of becoming the cynical teenager?
Just keep them playing, and by which I mean, like, playing games that actually feel so great. Again, improv games, one word at a time stories, where you can see there's something amazing coming out of it. So it doesn't feel silly so it's silly in one sense, but in another sense, a whole story has been created, and it's quite magical. So anything that allows them to also still feel like they're achieving something. I mean that in the loosest possible sense. So it doesn't have to be an amazing story. It doesn't have to be the best story they ever said, but just so they can notice, oh, this is accumulating. And actually, the further I go, the more interesting it is. And it feels a bit scary, because I've got, two sentences that are great. And if we stopped here, I would be a genius, but I'm going to push myself onto that third sentence where it might all fall apart. So we should probably just demonstrate that, Rob, just quickly, a word at a time story.
Okay.
We'll just do 2 sentences, just so people at home know how to play with their kids.
Okay.
So don't swear. It's all right. And remember, we're allowed to fail. At the beginning of all of my classes, I make people take a failure oath to promise that they will fail.
I give myself permission to fail.
Thank you very much. Okay, here we go. Once
upon
a
time
there
happened
to
be
a
small
beetle.
The
beetle
ran
into
a
car.
Oh
my
goodness.
It's
a
beetle. Bam, bam, bam. We'll edit there. Well done, everybody. It was a beetle running into a beetle.
It was very meta.
So that's just a really simple game, and kids really respond well to that game. And you can play that in different ways. You can tell a story. You can if you have more than one child, you can get them to play like a character. So you and I could be one person speaking, like, I went to the. So you can interview someone. It's just just really great fun games to play with the youth of the adults of tomorrow.
Yeah, but that just gives them permission to fail, which I think is I have a 4-year-old, so I'm very aware of giving her space to explore and to fail. Okay, brilliant. All right, so we've all failed, and that has been a success, which in itself is brilliant. Curiosity. So curiosity is perhaps the cousin of being obvious.
Yes. Yeah. So I think I say, like, imagine follow your obvious is like the pathway, and curiosity is the berries on the bushes as you go down this pathway. So yeah, just being interested in things that are happening for no reason other than being interested in them. Again, this kind of actually fits to the education thing. So we were taught so much at school, you should only be interested in birds if you're going to become a bird expert, but actually, why not just be interested in bird? Why not be interested in all sorts of interesting, there's so many interesting things. There's a thing called the Boring Conference. Have you heard of that? The Boring Conference?
Yes, Jay, I forgot the chap's name, James something, isn't it? Yes. I went to one. Yeah, it was a talk on like, pencils for 20 minutes.
That's brilliant. Right. And so the principle of the Boring Festival, and everybody should look this up if they have it, is that nothing is boring if you pay attention to it. So the one I remember was the scale of the different colors of milk. So obviously milk we know is mainly white, but actually if you put all the milk next to each other, it's completely different. It's really magical. And there was another guy who had every time he sneezed, he opened his eyes and wrote down what the first thing he saw was and the time. So it would say, like, Tuesday 2:53 wall, and then he just read them all out, and it turned it into poetry. So none of and again, these people are just doing these for the Boring Conference. They're not doing it because they're now specialists in milk or specialists in things you see when you open your eyes. They're just to be curious. And actually, when we're improvisers, it gives us stuff to use, stuff to work from. And in all creativity, just having this kind of tank of experience and ideas and inspirations that we find by simply being curious is a really great gift.
Yeah, and just ideas. So it's just having those experiences gives us ideas that we can pull from and opens ourselves up to creating more ideas, I guess.
Yeah. And also the other side of curiosity is to be curious about yourself, so that when we are in situations, we can be curious about how we respond to them. So that if, for example, if you came to me with a great idea and I get that weird feeling, have you ever had that feeling when you're just like, I hate that idea? And you think, I don't know why I've reacted so badly to that perfectly reasonable idea. So can I, rather than being really angry with myself for being angry or deciding that that's true, just to be able to be curious about why I've responded in that way is really helpful as well, because we can sometimes jump to judgment. And again, the same reason, like if you had responded that way to me, I could be like, oh, Rob's such a rude man. I'm trying not to swear. Rob is such a rude man. This is why people sound like how they sound on Radio 4, is because they can't swear, I realized. So you go, oh, Rob is such a rude man. But actually much more useful if I could take a breath and be curious about why you might have responded in that way. So curiosity can expand us sort of both externally and internally.
I wrote here a quote for you about pride is an obstacle to us being curious. So I guess that's linked to we don't want to fail, and so we would rather stay inside our box, which we know is quite safe.
Yeah. And also that I don't know if you recognize this, but I recognize it. Like when I was growing up, my big brother, whenever he said anything like, oh, have you seen this? I'd be like, yeah, I have. Even if I hadn't, just because I didn't want to be the one who hadn't seen it or didn't know it, So that as well, like and I think I quote my friend Olivia, who's like genuinely one of the cleverest people I know. She's one officially, she's a doctor of law. Environmental law, the coolest of the doctors, but she's also just really wise, and she's the person who will happily say, no, I don't know, what's that? I don't know about that, tell me about that. And I remember the first time I heard her say that, I was like, wow, you're so happy to like not know things. She's like, well, how would I ever know? Which is so obvious. Volley obvious.
I that's definitely something that I am aware I am better at as I get older. I think when I was younger, I just was less comfortable with myself. And as you become more comfortable and older, I think. Yeah, except I don't know. I don't know that. I want to know that. Yeah. Okay, cool. Right. So we've been curious. We are now willing to fail. We followed our obvious. Let's talk about holding the space, taking responsibility for the energy in the room. That was another chapter which really spoke to me.
Yeah, great. So this is an interesting one, especially with Zoom platformy talking rather than in real life talking. So in real life talking, I don't think everyone would think I was a woo-woo hippie if I said there's an energy in the room. Like, we can feel that energy, and we can feel when it's not being held and it's not being looked after. But even in this conversation, actually, so let's talk about it for online. We have a responsibility to the energy. So when you say to me, tell me a bit about that. So why don't you do that again, and I'll do a not respecting the energy response.
Okay. Pippa, there was a section of your book that really spoke to me about taking responsibility for the energy in the room. Perhaps you could talk about that.
I couldn't do it for long enough. But yeah, so we're responsible for the energy. I have to. You're literally kind of throwing me a ball, and in the improv games, again, people at home may be shuddering, remembering a game of soundball, but it's actually a brilliant game, and I think all of life is held in this game, soundball, where you throw an imaginary ball, and if I throw a ball like this at you, exactly, you can't help but. So you had to catch it. I could see you go, oh, am I supposed to catch it? And almost a bit of you went, I've got it. I can't let that ball go. Yeah. So energy travels even through the screen, the Zoom screen. Energy is just an incredible thing. So we've got to make sure that we're looking after the energy. So if we're in a management position or we're in charge of the group, just making sure that we're online, we're looking at the screen and seeing like what energy are people in? Do we need to do something just to like move our bodies even? Because we forget our bodies when we're in our houses all the time. So do we just need to roll our shoulders? You don't even have to do that in an awkward, hey guys, let's do a icebreaker. We don't have to do that. You can actually, if I just start doing that, other people will start doing it, because you just mirror, you just do. It's almost like permission to do it, because actually when you do it, it feels really nice. But when we're in real life, we can just, if we even as the sort of host of a meeting, if we can just be in that space, being mindful, like even the fact that we've even thought about, okay, how I'm going to make sure everybody's here. If the energy drops over here, am I going to pick it back up again? Do I need to do that, or does the energy need to drop? So if we can just think about it in terms of energy, looking after the energy. And there's another great phrase. So if you're a participant, think of it this phrase, which is, if you're wondering whose turn it is, it's your turn. So a lot of the time people don't participate because they're not sure if they're allowed to speak yet. So the host needs to make sure they've set the boundaries of the interaction. Like, is everyone allowed to speak? Is Rob need to speak more because this is his project, whatever's going on? But also I need to make sure that I am stepping into that space. So the host needs to be making sure it's a space that's steppable into, and I need to make sure that I'm taking that opportunity, even when the fear is saying, don't say that, you're an idiot. Go, follow your obvious.
Follow obvious, be willing to fail, and that's really good. So that the host should set the boundaries, and if you feel it's your turn to speak, step into it. And that's yeah. Okay, really cool. For everyone listening online, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat down the side. We'll get to questions in a couple of minutes. Know when to leave the stage, know when to step back. How do you teach that? And we've all met people who don't understand when it's that time to step back. How should we approach that moment?
So in improvisation, what tends to happen if we're teaching an improv scene is somebody will two people will be doing a scene and it's really painful and it's not going anywhere, it's not funny, and you can see in their face that they really want the scene to end, but they keep grasping for something. We'll find it, we'll get there, which is a great attitude, like, okay, we're going to carry on, we're going to persevere. But there are times when we know that something is over, that something is finished, and at that point I will just say to them, you can leave the stage if you want to. And they'll go, like I've given them their life back. I mean, it's amazing. And we see it so often that we keep staying somewhere, even though it really is time to leave the stage. It's obviously different if we've got somebody who refuses to leave the stage, that is a slightly different thing. But we're talking in this instance about how we often stay somewhere that is hurting us or is horribly uncomfortable and is not healthy, or it's just not working. So we could take that as the smallest thing. It could be that, you know, we're doing a presentation and it's just falling apart. And actually, probably the best thing I need to say is, I'm really sorry, everybody. The PowerPoint's not working. I need to go back and look at a couple of things. Can we redo this, you know, in a week? That's one way to leave a stage. It could be something bigger. It could be, I'm not happy in this job and I'm staying in this job because I feel like I have to stay in this job. I'm scared of what's next. So we can think of it in terms of that as well. When do I need to leave the stage? And that's a time to be really curious of yourself as well. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's. I do want to ask one more question before we get to audience questions. So, improv can teach us to adapt to whatever life throws at us. How have you adapted to the last year? It's been almost a year since we moved into lockdown 1 and the world changed forever. So how have you adapted? How has the book helped you do that?
Obviously, as a performer, my work was literally all decimated because we're not allowed to be in the theatre. So that was a bit sucky, as they say. And so doing that meant that I just had to stop, actually. So I probably stopped doing any performing for a month or 2 months while I figured out how I wanted to carry on online, finding different ways. So I didn't start teaching online till I think September. So I took that long, from March to September. You do the maths, it's not my strong point. That's how long I took, because I didn't want to squeeze something that works really well live onto Zoom until I knew how to do it. So one way I adapted actually was to slow down. My diary, if I look at my diary from this time last year, it's insane. I don't know how I did all of that stuff, running around. And I live in London. Obviously, going in and out of London is like an hour each time. So the fact that I've gained so much time to do things like read all those books I buy off the internet and then they put them in a pile. So I've been reading more. I've been just taking time to go, well, what do I really want to do? I was really lucky that the book deal came along literally the week after lockdown. They said, would you like to write this book? So I switched basically almost completely from let's say before the deal was like 80-20 in terms of performing and writing. Now it's probably the other way around. So now I'm 80% writing and teaching and 20% performing.
And how has it been teaching improv online on Zoom?
It's been good because people have got used to Zoom. So I think also if I'd started when everyone else was starting, you're not just dealing with your own, okay, how do I do breakout rooms and stuff? You're dealing with other people going, I don't know how this works. I feel uncomfortable. Whereas now, if I said, let's say they said we could meet on next Monday, I think we'd all need a transition period where we learn how to be in real life again. So I think even if once restrictions are open and we can all meet in real life, I think again I'll probably take some time before I do those workshops.
Great, very cool. And I imagine it's opened you up to a more international audience as well, who perhaps couldn't have attended class in person. Yeah. My last class I had 2 girls calling in from Texas. So they were getting up at 4:00 in the morning to come to the class. That was really cool. And I had a guy in Spain, but also just like in the UK, I've got people coming from all over the UK. And normally, I teach in London. So the furthest I've had people from is like Bristol. So the idea that all these people would be able to, come and learn with me is really great. And I think that's really important, is we do have to look at what we've gained as well as the things that we've lost in this time. It's very easy for us to go, this has been the worst year ever. And in many ways, it has been really challenging, but we've also got to just remember, which again, I talk about in the book, like the successes that happen in failure and the failure that happens in success. So maybe this whole year has been a bit of a failure, but there's been successes within it, little moments that we've been able to gain something from. Yeah, that's really cool. Well, look, let's take a question from Alvaro. who asks, could you share how you structure a virtual improv session these days in terms of which games, leveling up the difficulty, specifically think about those who have not tried improv before? So what exercises can people do at home? Obviously, other than looking up your classes online and joining the next iterations of those, what perhaps is a game someone could take away today they could improve their improv?
Well, yeah, great question. So when I teach online, particularly like business teams, team development stuff, it is generally the same games that someone who knows improv will have played before. But so I will generally start with a sound ball, but you have to or a word ball. So the first one to make, so I'll literally say Rob and throw an imaginary ball, and Rob will catch it. And then he would say my name and throw it back. So we just do a name. And then actually, once we've got used to that kind of mechanic, I can still throw that ball with a word. So I could go Rob orange, and then he catches it, and then you're on mute, Rob. But never mind. That happens. Yeah, great. Pineapple, thank you. So you could just do that. So that's a way of just making sure that we're aware of each other in the space, making sure that we're building on ideas, that we're saying the first thing that comes to our mouth rather than trying to think of the right idea. Then I might play something like Endless Box, and this is a game you can play on your own. Endless Box is where you have an imaginary box and you pull out of the box things and you just name them. But it's really important that you mime pulling them out of the box. So it's like rabbit, cat, nightmare, dreams. Yeah. So you name whatever it is that comes out of the box. And if I was doing an online class with multiple people, then I would put people in breakout rooms. And the other person's job would be to encourage that person. So after each thing to be like, yeah, woo, that's great. And if they're struggling, and if you do play this at home, you can pull things out. You can go blank, 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 blank pajamas. So you can just say blank until a word comes to you. So those would be two games. And then maybe a third example would be to play yes and yes but with each other. And then you could do a word at a time exercise. And generally that can take up 45 minutes, just those games. Great. Because we just keep being curious about what's happening. Oh, you seem to be pausing there. You said the same word 4 times. What's going on for you? You look stressed, or wow, you're having a great time. You seem really good at this. How, what's your secret? That kind of thing. Very cool.
Let's take Matt's question. So when you see something and say, that's really good improv, what is it that's standing out to you? As an improv expert, what do you really hone in on and go, I'm jealous, that's really good?
I wouldn't be jealous, obviously, Rob. Generally it's connection. Connection is one of the big things about improvisation. And so often what we see when improv isn't strong is that the improvisers are so in their head, they're in that third circle of energy, like here, because they're going, well, I've got to say something clever. Oh, that last bit didn't work. And so they're not connected to their team. It's 5 people trying desperately to say something funny or clever rather than 5 people discovering what the show is. Yeah. So if I can watch 5 people having the best time, I will care far less about any of the theatrical narrative structures that they're managing to whip out of their heads. It will just be, God, they're having a great time and I want to play with them.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, let's take Sophia's question. How does improv help you in your everyday life? I think that's addressed in the book, but perhaps when was the last time you actively went, I'm using something from my book?
And I wonder if Sophia's like, how does that improv help you, Pippa Evans? And you're always like, how does improv help you in your everyday life? You haven't covered it, Pippa and Rob. You've been banging on about everything else. But in terms of me, so for me, it was really helpful for my anxiety because my anxiety is really bad. And I talk about it in the book quite a lot, quite graphically at points. It just stopped me being stressed because a lot of improv is about agreeing or stepping back. So Keith Johnson has this great quote, there are people who say yes and they're rewarded with adventure, and there are people who say no and they're rewarded with safety. And I think actually anxiety is people sitting in between those two things. It definitely was for me. It was like, I don't know whether to say yes or no. I'm having both FOMO and JOMO at the same time. It's just everything. So you're just constantly in this shaking space, and then you're saying yes to things, but you've got no in the back of your head, or you're saying no to things, but you've got yes in the back of your head. So what I think it does is ground you so that you trust your instincts. You know why you're saying yes to things. You know why you're saying no to things. You're able to see opportunities, but you're also able to know when you need to take a step back and go, do you know what? Actually, today, I'm going to let someone else have that opportunity, and I'm going to go and recalibrate and look after myself today so I can be fresh for an adventure tomorrow.
Something that sunk, lifting off that, something that spoke to me in the book was how we often think about success as an individual, that we hold up an individual to be successful. And improv only works when the team is successful. And so do you have to teach people, and did you go through a stage of kind of going, okay, it's not just me who has to look good on stage, but I have to make my team stronger and my team look better?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely 100%. Because, and again, this comes back to education. We are taught, we're essentially taught everyone should be the prime minister. Everyone should be good enough to be the prime minister, or, I mean, I thought mine went, that everyone should be able to be the top, the CEO, the head of, the manager. That's the only way we can show any kind of status in life. And so we do fight. We find ourselves in these places where we're like, actually, I feel horrible, but I'm going to get that. I need to get that promotion. So it becomes all about our individual journey, rather than being like, well, actually, if I'm running a really happy team and if we're doing great stuff. So Showstopper is a great example for this, my improv musical that I'm in. When we first started it, we used to get really upset, all of us, if we weren't the main character in the show. So this is going back to 2007 or 8. Get really upset if we weren't the main character in the show. We're like, oh, no one wants me to be the protagonist of the story. And if you were the tree, it was like, ugh. And the audience afterwards would be like, wow, you were so good as the protagonist. And then turn to the other person and be like, were you in it? You know? So, I mean, ego-wise, it was like, boof, boof. And then what we had to come to terms with as a team was, we have to recognize that playing a tree is just as important as playing the main character, because without that tree, that main character does not have a rich scene. That character is just a person on a stage. So being the tree is just as important as playing the main character, even if it's not reflected back in real life, you know. But also the person playing the main character has to respect that as well. So the main character person has to respect the fact that one day they're going to be the tree. So they need to respect the tree. So respect the tree is what I'm saying.
Do you think that individual success versus group success is a cultural attribute? Because I just think of the UK comedy, UK sitcoms and comedy is often you look at Ricky Gervais in The Office as an individual, whereas US have these big writer rooms with 20, 30 people in the room. Do you think there's something, and maybe the UK has a very strong stand-up scene, perhaps I would argue the US has a stronger improv scene. Do you see that as something cultural in the British psyche?
I think definitely in comedy land. I would say America has just as many problems with individuals needing to be the star of the show, actually. But in terms of comedy, yeah, absolutely. Here, you know, a sitcom should be written by yourself. Every female comedian in the world has been compared to Victoria Wood, and the fact that Victoria Wood wrote her own sitcom and her own show, and it's like, well, why aren't you doing that? Because you should be like Victoria Wood. And you go, well, actually, maybe we can't all be like Victoria Wood, you know. Can we allow people to be successful if they worked in a team? Is it okay for 6 people to be to share the success, then rather than one person to have all of the fame and the money? Because we see what happens. Like, we all get burnout from famous people, right? When you're watching telly, you're like, not them again. Ugh. And then that person gets kind of thrown off the side because everyone goes, sorry, everyone's a bit bored of you now. We gave you everything for 5 years and now we're going to kick you off place. Actually, television and theatre and everything would be so much richer if everybody was those people that you see where you go, I recognize them. What were they in? Like, actually, that should be what we're aiming for, is that everybody is I recognize you, rather than I know your name and I know all 7 things you did because they were the only 7 things that were on telly.
Yeah. Cool. All right, cool. Thank you. Let's take a question from Valeria. Any tips on how to plug into the improv community in London? I used to be in an improv team in San Francisco, but moved to Europe recently, and I tend to sleep at night, so improv is gone from my life.
Oh, Valeria, I'm sorry for your experience, but yeah, absolutely. So there's so many great improv schools. There's Hoopla, there's the Nursery, there's the FA. Those are the three main Londony ones. I'm just thinking because obviously with going online, things have changed. What I'd recommend is they all do jams and they all do drop-ins. So a jam is like where loads of people just show up and you do a show together. I'm explaining that for people who are not improvisers, not for you, Valeria. I'm sure you know what a jam is. But you could just show up and then you just get your face seen around, and then people will start going, oh, hey, do you want to come to this? You can make friends. You could start to recognize people. So if I were you, I'd go on any of those sites, Hoopla, FA, or the Nursery. FA is particularly like American style comedy. So if you're like, if you were used to be in a troupe, which was very like Harold's and all those things that other people are like, what, Harold's? That they might be the place for you to go. But yeah, go and find a jam and just keep turning up. That's how I got into improv. I just kept turning up. And then eventually they went, do you want to come and play? So perseverance.
Keep some, and those companies will work for newcomers or people who have experience. So if you want to start from scratch, seek out those, and indeed Pippa Evans courses as well.
Yeah, well, so I suppose the reason I mentioned those rather than mine is because mine are really aimed at people who have no wish to be a performer. So if you're wanting to explore improvisation, but you don't want to get on a stage and do a showcase at the end and things like that, come and work with me. I really do just talk about applying. We do all the same stuff. We just don't do a show at the end. So whereas of course those other places are great places to go if you're like, actually I've got a bit of a performer scratch. I need to itch. So I need to scratch, whichever way around it is. Yeah.
Great. Let's take, I hope I said this right, Aruna's question, who says, really fun and helpful talk. While experience helps, sometimes we go memory blank. Do you remember any great instances of when you found yourself or others just having to break out of a sudden blank zone?
The thing that came to my mind was we were in New York City doing Showstopper as part of there's like a season they do in September, I think it is, for Broadway. So you're kind of auditioning your show for Broadway. So big, whoop, high level, we better do this well. And they asked for this song style of Godspell. And I had to sing the song. So what happens is the host goes, and they sing in the style of, and he said, Godspell. And in that moment, I could not remember anything about Godspell, but all the eyes were on me because my character had been named as the one who was going to sing this song. And then suddenly the only thing that came to me was, prepare ye the way of the Lord. But I was so frozen, I couldn't think. Well, I don't know how to improvise this. And we were in like some weird science fiction setting. So I just suddenly found myself going, prepare ye the way of the robot. And it was so awkward. And everybody, but I tell you what it was though, my teammates, they all looked at me like, Pippa's in pain, Pippa's in pain. And they all just turned, looked out to the audience and went, prepare ye the way of the robot. And because they just got behind my idea, the audience were like, we love that bit. That was the best bit. But in that moment, I literally just telling that story, I can feel my face has gone a bit red, just the horror of that moment where I thought, I'm just going to be staring, singing nothing. And then when I did sing, it wasn't the most amazing thing in the world, but my teammates made it the most amazing thing in the world.
And that's knowing that your teammates have your back.
Got your back.
Got your back.
Okay.
Wonderful. All right. Eli has a question. I've noticed that non-comedians tend to fall back on a very specific type of humor because that's what they know. How would you recommend broadening that range?
I noticed that non-comedian. Oh, right. Okay. So I wonder, Eli, if that's, do you mean broaden your own range or broaden? I don't think you can broaden your without being quite personal. Hey, Rob, have you thought about listening to?
I mean, I suppose is the answer. You go have a wider exposure to different sorts of comedy.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, So when we started doing, say, the musical show, most of us had only seen very specific, the usual musicals, Cats, etc., The Phantom of the Opera. And then as we carried on doing it, we were like, we've got to get better because we started getting musical fans who would be like, Fun Home. And we go, what's that? So, so we now have this amazing catalogue of musicals. So when people say to me, I don't like musical theatre, I think, well, you just haven't seen the show that speaks to you. Yeah. So probably the same thing, exactly as you say, like if someone is particularly sarcastic. So maybe I'll speak to the first person. So if anyone here feels like, God, I am often really sarcastic, like, yeah, go and find like who are the lovely comics, who are the fun, sweet comics, who are the whimsical comics, you know, go and watch someone like Josie Long, who's just lovely. So there is a way to be funny and be kind at the same time. Go and watch sketch comedy rather than stand-up comedy. If you're only watching comedy in clubs, like that kind of stand-up, can you find it in a different setting? Because actually sometimes if you're in a club, you know, when the clubs reopen, it can be quite aggressive because we're battling the drunks. So there's like a kind of sense of battle. Whereas if it's, you know, in an art center or in a sort of, you know, a loft in Shoreditch, wherever you are, you know, find the weird comedy. Go and find, you know, when you see a poster that says there's a comedy night on, go to it. Yeah, don't go to the ones that just have 5 Google star reviews, because they'll all be done by the manager. Go to the ones that are on the weird poster.
I'd recommend, and the Edinburgh Fringe, if when that starts up again, go and see the free shows there. I've seen some absolute dross, but some absolute gold just hidden in a basement somewhere off Nidri Street. It's all right. We have 5 minutes left, and I would love to finish with you reading a segment from your book.
Okay, great. I'm gonna read this. It's just from the end, actually. So, in a way, you don't have to read the rest of it. No, do please order it. This is just the end of my book, and I'll just read it. When you go for a walk in the park, through fields or any green space, there are these little paths where you can see many people have realized it makes more sense to walk in a certain direction rather than follow the council's approved way. The grass is worn and a new path has been created. Humans have improvised a new route by following their obvious and placing one foot in front of the other. These tracks are known in planning circles as desire paths. The people act out their desire and a new lane is made. Often, councils will incorporate them into the official path system during their next tidy up, recognizing that the people have spoken. Some councils will do everything they can to try to stop people going off the official track. Red and white tape, fencing, keep off the grass signs. Yet we persevere, though some may tut. Because we know it makes no sense to follow the prescribed path, the path that was created perhaps without consultation, a path made for aesthetics rather than practicality. We need to question our paths, to find our own desire paths. If we are onto something, others will follow. My deepest hope is that you then find your voice, speak up for yourself and for others, and you see positive change in tiny ways that forge a new path, a path you didn't know you wanted to follow, but seems completely obvious once you're there. May improvisation give you the courage to take your space in the world, forge your path, and follow your obvious into new and exciting places, right on your doorstep. We have an abundance inside of us. When we are able to access our abundance, we realize the riches of the world were inside us all along. Keep shifting the edge of your comfort zone. Expand it inch by inch until you find the real boundaries, rather than those that were bestowed upon you. We have no idea what's going to happen globally in the next 5 years, let alone 50, which means we need to be ready to adapt, to accept change, and know ourselves inside out. We need to be ready to speak with our neighbours, to move forward even when in conflict and find different ways to approach new and repeating issues. We need to be able to do all these things whilst laughing, dancing, and embracing the fullness of life in all its messy glory. Improv is the art of being okay when the plan takes an unexpected turn. Improv is the art of trusting your skills and your gut. Improv is the art of knowing yourself and being able to work in relationship with others. Improv is the art of failing forwards by embracing and reframing wisdom which appears in the form of a mistake. Improv is the art of yes and no and all that lies between. Improv is being able to leave the space and know you have given all you can to that moment. Improv is celebrating the brilliance of others without feeling that it diminishes your own. Improv is a world that is accessible to all, embracing of fear and full of hope. For without hope, we cannot improvise. Everything you need is inside yourself. It just takes a while to find it. Thank you.
Oh, and with that, Pippa, thank you so much for joining us at Google today. Improv Your Life is available now in Awkward bookshops. Please support your small local bookshops that are near you. Pippa, thank you so much. And I hope that when we return to the office, you can join us for a session at some point to teach us all how to improv our lives.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.